In the geometrical stethoscope of the figures of time and space, speech begins to take form, and speech can take many forms within and without, in the social sphere, in the macrocosm, and of course in the microcosm. And it is somehow in between the two that faculties of perception and judgment and sensation and experience and probably a host of other powers and qualities are brought into play to create an image of the true, to create a vision of the world, to take in what seems to be, i.e. that which is offered by sense impression, and to synthesize through the bodily apertures that we have, to synthesize spontaneously, seemingly outside of linear time, and constellate and project a vision or an imaginative picture of the world, of what the world is. So, naturally, it is the artist that, so to speak, takes this bull by the horns and offers to the world a lived image of that whole entire process of perception and how it is synthesized through judgment, through talent, through inspiration, in order to become an image of the world which is the work of art. The work of art being that which the imagination trusts the most to give it a true image of the world. This is how it's supposed to be. But in actuality, the mind is full of so much more than this. So I would offer you, preliminarily, a definition of crazy thought. What is crazy thought? Well, crazy thought, first I can describe it. Crazy thought is intimate to all of us. Crazy thought is familiar to each of us in our own way, perhaps in our own original way, if we can break through to understanding it on that level. Crazy thought is, though, of a negative quality. Crazy thought is of a negative quality rather than an affirmative quality because it lacks in its inner structure metaphysical veracity. It lacks this. Now, we're going to have to talk about the criteria of what constitutes metaphysical veracity. At some point, perhaps, I can suggest something in the course of this advance, of this tirade, of this essay, which the word means attempt. And in the course of it, maybe we can discover what could be inspired criteria, how we could, discern the metaphysical veracity of any of the myriad, infinite number of thoughts which are always before us. It is our inheritance as human beings to be thinking creatures, creatures of thought, beset, bedeviled, constituted by thought, symbolized by thought, expressing thought, living by thought and dying by thought, flourishing by thought and decaying by thought. All of these things are what thought hath wrought. So, in light of this then, let us continue to think about this. Now, crazy talk then. Crazy talk. We've all, even before we had words for it, we've all come to understand the challenge that crazy thought brings us, whether or not we have these words that I offer for it or not. But crazy thought is always around us. Oh, I remember the good old days, to speak comically for a moment. I remember the good old days when you, in the bohemian part of town, could go into the coffee shop or the hamburger joint with your armload of esoteric books and sit down and begin to read about, oh, I don't know, the secret history of the spear of the Teutonic spear, the symbol in the operas of Wagner, for example, or Nietzschean paragraphs upon the Übermensch or the Superman, or any of these things. And at some point or other, someone somewhere around, if the Bohemia was a fertile enough place, would pick up on your wavelength and come over and buttonhole you because these symbols and these images, these literary figments of fragments, are the very stuff of the visions, the unspeakable visions of the individual, as I believe Artaud coined that phrase, and the Beats picked it right up. The unspeakable visions of the individual. And it goes way, way back. That phrase lays claim upon a bountiful stream of human thought speech, the prophetic strain of human thought speech, which is also simultaneously the crank stream of human thought speech, or the vehicle of much, much crazy talk, of much, much crazy thought, of much, much crazy speech, of much, much crazy interpretive meanings, of much, much crazy codes. Yes, I'm talking about those streams of thought that we follow slightly enough to track the idiosyncratic variations that occur in the thought streams of individuals, so that we can come to understand it when a paranoid conspiracy is placed before us in the cafe, or on the street corner, or in the church basement, or in any number of places. The speech of individuals, though, this is what I'm saying. At one time, I don't know if it's applicable to everyone, let us just speak of it in general characterological terms. Speak of the psyche. The psyche seeks to discern the streams of speech that it attends to. It hears much wisdom in the communities in which it moves. It also hears much craziness in the communities in which it moves. It hears much folly. It hears much errors of judgment. It hears, on the other hand, much sincerity of attempt. It hears much innocence. It hears much righteously aggrieved indignation. And these are all good. And it's easier to find truth in some of these statements, streams of speech, than it is in others. So the psyche must discern between what's crazy talk and what is not crazy talk. Ah, yes. So characterologically, in this, archetypal sketch, of a formative psyche coming to try to learn to understand the styles of speech in which it lives and moves and has its being. The formative psyche must learn to discern what is crazy and what is not crazy. So oftentimes the psyche strikes up friendships with voices in the mind. Voices in the mind affixed to styles of thought and ideas and certain rhythms of the momentum of thought, so that a character is kind of like what? Conjured or created. A character designed to represent to the psyche, the discerning psyche, at its table of voices, a view into what could be considered true. So, in other words, one cultivates the voices that thought uses to take form in the world. Okay, fine. And so, it's easy to do. At some point, okay, here's what it comes down to, at least at this moment in time. It comes down to the shock. Let us recognize the shock that any individual in the democratic universe, the shock that an individual feels when what was once the crazy talk of an individual, a beleaguered and vulnerable individual, subject to the vicissitudes of their own disordered vision, struggling, with whom you could make friends, with whom you could see the human reality, the visions of an individual, crazy or not. But then at some point, one becomes aware of a transition, and it's a phenomena of mass society, and it has been with us since before the 20th century. And it is the stuff of political theory, of political science. It is the stuff of what Hannah Arendt, that great writer, is trying to discover when she writes a book with such a title as The Origins of Totalitarianism. Or, more popularly, when she writes a book called The Banality of Evil. Right? This is what we're talking about, that kind of like milieu, that political milieu where the psyche still has her thoughts constellated, some of which are crazy. Anyway, the shock is what I'm saying. The shock that is hard to put into words when we come to be aware of the transition from the unspeakables of one individual who undertakes on their own the burden of their own craziness in their individual life, in their individual daemon, in their individual destiny. When a transition occurs, at what point does it become this way? When that same effluvia of disordered mental energy, disordered no matter how unique, enters into the collective realm and becomes suddenly a mass opinion or a mass thought or the basis of an ideology in one direction, right? Or in another direction, what happens when it enters from the sphere of the individual into that realm of the collective psyche where it begins to become receptive to energies from below, right? The atavistic regions, so to speak. The primordial regions in the archaeology of the psyche where the voices that can be uncovered, that can come roaring forth, and the perceptions that understand them are every bit as primordial as the energies that they understand. So need we belabor the point that we enter into these realms of vulnerability to these kind of momentums of thought, vulnerability to momentums of thought that are extra-rational, you could say. And the phenomena of mass beliefs, mass delusions, of the destruction of the criteria, which at one time might hold water, but at some point, at some turn, the stream of voices, the river water jumps the bank. Right, and you have a flood, or you have a turning, or you have a changing, or you have the creation or formation of a new kind of oxbow lake, whatever, what have you. So it is at that point then that, I don't know, you might fall back into, okay, well, what are the criteria here? How can I determine what is true and what is not true? And this is an age-old question. This is not a new question. The urgency of it always strikes each psyche anew when it sincerely comes to that question, of course. But the question itself is very, very old. So, as Pilate said when he washed his hands, what is truth? And as I ask you now, what is truth? What is truth? Well, what I would say is that very question belongs to a world that I do not know. Instead, I have to go to a world that I do know in order to ask myself that question and try to come to understand that question. A world I do know. Now, you might have heard, it's a truism, it's a platitude, it's a cliche. It is often repeated when it is said, the truth will set you free. Okay? In one's own individual world of vision, though, one senses a certain lack in that statement. Now, the momentum is there. The truth will set you free, and then everything proceeds from that. It leads thought in a certain way. But in one's individual discerning psyche, one understands that, oh, wait a minute now. This is only the part of the utterance. There is another part of this utterance that is being left out. And the other part, the counterpart of this utterance, which would make it a whole utterance, i.e. an utterance of truth, which is left out, is in the individual realm, in the subjective realm, in the subjective memory of the reading of the original text. And the original utterance is, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Oh, now I get it. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Ah, you shall know the truth, knowing the truth. And that is what will set you free. Okay, that utterance is part of our imaginative inheritance. And if you don't know, that utterance comes from, or it is preserved by, the annals and the tablets of received religion. That's one place where it is preserved. Other texts preserve it in other paraphrases with, greater or lesser degrees of legitimacy at any particular turning of the age. But at any rate, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free is a respected religious utterance, scripturally validated, and there for us as part of our external inheritance from the field of the discipline meaning discern, the discipline of religion. Okay, but now let's go to this other realm of inward and subjective understanding, equally fertile and rich, and less different from the realm of religion than we are sometimes led to believe. And that is the field of literature or art. Call it art, literature, art in words. And there, Mr. Keats, our forebearer, Mr. Keats teaches us that truth is beauty, and beauty is truth, and that is all you know, and all you need to know. And this too, we see a similar phenomenon. When it's quoted, or the way it usually is handed down from age to age, is like, beauty is truth, truth is beauty. And then, people take it wherever they take it from there. But the significant part of it, at least the part where it behooves us to pay more attention to, is likewise, with the other statement, is that this is all you know, and all you need to know. Notice that the word all is repeated twice. All you know, and all you need to know. And notice that the word need is also a very important word in there. And of course, know. And know seems to be repeated twice. So knowledge, then. What is it? What is it to know? You shall know the truth, and it shall set you free. So then, how then do we know? How then do we know the truth to set us free? If truth is beauty and beauty is truth, and this is all we know, he says that we know it, and all we need to know, and that's good news. Nevertheless, what does it mean then to know it? And so that's what we're exploring here. It strikes, an internal register, so to speak. It strikes an internal kind of ratio or system of comparison or system of belief or knowledge. It strikes on us on that particular level. Okay? This level of vision. Okay? This level of poetic vision. It is the level of poetic vision in the imagination, which is the synthesizing factor or energy of the entire field of thought that appears before every individual, every moment of their lives. And it is the poetic ratio, which is the coordinating factor in that. And it is art, which exists as a gift to the culture to provide exemplary ways where people, upon the course of their own Bildungsroman, their own course of interior study, can abide themselves attending to, abide in attention to, and therefore educate their own souls on the road to truth or the road to life, which brings us to perhaps another statement seemingly bold and wild, until, of course, brought into the structure of a revealed religion. And then one more support for a great many number of imaginational suppositions. Anyway, the quote is, I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way, the truth, and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. We can say that the word I am is the expression of a character or a persona declaring what it is, who it is. We can also say, though, that I am is a more suggestive and poetic affirmation of metaphysical validity. The metaphysical validity, which is on the affirmative side of crazy thought. Crazy thought being metaphysically negative, not having in it any structure of metaphysical validity, whereas truth, the way, the truth, the life, truth, which is the truth of the way and the truth of life, truth is metaphysical validity contained in the structure of that utterance. That is how we know a statement is true. How does the artist answer this? The artist presents us with a synthesis of experience, vision, imagination, perception, judgment, realization, valid for the moment of its creation. Valid for the moment of its creation, which is outside of natural time, in one sense, but no less conditional for that. Conditional upon the circumstances under which the creation of it arose. You see? So the artistic statement of truth, artistic truth, which is beauty, and which is truth, which is all we need to know and all we know and all we need to know. But, that statement, though, can never claim for itself the imaginatory validity that a doctrinal, be it religious or political, or an ideological, be it psychological or social, or any such other number of relative validations, relative ratios and momentums of validation which attach themselves to ideas that become eventually in common circulation to the degree that the vulnerable psyche has no defense against it other than to fall into the realms of their own unspeakable visions, there to be vulnerable to God knows what kind of like individual toxins of the mind that are certainly out there, because this is our inheritance as mental beings, right, as imaginative beings. We are subject to the dynamics of folly as well as the dynamics of truth, or whatever the opposite of folly is. Sometimes I think that folly and gravity are the same thing, only manifesting slightly in different ways. Jugglery, for example. How can juggling and everything that juggling suggests, the movement of a form through one container after another, suggesting, of course, the movement of thought and creative and inspired thought in time through the forms of nature, and yet done in a spirit of pure play, and in a spirit also just as open to illusionism and the arts of illusionism, as well as the arts of verification, or the arts of veracity, the lie that tells the truth, you could say, or the truth that tells the lie. Perhaps I could use that as a way to step into another kind of comparison. I'm just trying to evoke criteria of discernment as they come to mind, as I hopefully can adhere to this unknown subject matter in this unknown way, but hopefully with a harmonious kind of progression of forward motion. That being said, whatever I was saying has vanished into the air like a snake, disappearing into its hole in the ground. I could try to reach for its tail, but I don't want to do that because it would only get away. Plus, it would also be dangerous because what if that snake inside of its lair turns tail and turns to face me with its venomous side rather than its grabbable side? What would I do then? Reaching into the dark. I would have to be aware of just of the natural lore of this created world with its own signs, so to speak, with its own patterns, you might say. So, how is it then that ideas in the social sphere, with a compelling hold upon the belief of those who hear them, these ideas are expressed in particular forms of motion, very often in the flowing forms of human speech, so that they can be identified with a certain kind of personality or figurehead or exemplary revealer of a familiar enough form so that one can recognize it again and again and again, so that it becomes more and more familiar to the mind. It becomes more and more familiar to the mind, and it stimulates the mind in a certain way as time goes on, and those very stimulations take form into creating a story, an ever-changing story of the powers of the world at play and at work in the world, a momentum which draws belief in. And like any momentum, it increases, it waxes, and it wanes, and it rolls towards certain ends, certain nodes, certain turnings where it incorporates other energies, and then it goes on from there. In this way, it's almost like an external model of consciousness, whatever that is. An external model of consciousness which one can love, become attached to in a certain way, seek nourishment from, reinforcement for one, feeling a certain kind of lack in one's own self. Perhaps we fall into the trap when we lose touch with our own poetic imaginations as individuals. Perhaps we lose touch with that, and it makes us vulnerable to falling into these traps of all these seductive and external momentums, which build themselves up into stories, seeming to be exactly in the same pattern as the stories told to us by our own inner psyches. And it is so easy in the dynamics of folly to be fooled by that, right? And to step into that and to let it build and flow again and again. And alas, it draws to itself its own form of literature. It draws to itself its own form of literature that seems to follow the external forms of inspired literature, and yet it is not that. But it draws itself to that, and the momentum is just as real. The momentum is just as powerful as it is in the true psyche. The momentum is just as compelling. Belief is led sometimes even more strongly, as if yanked by a bridle. And isn't it odd that we come back again and again to primary forms of literature, the nursery rhyme, the simple statement, right? These aphorisms. If I may digress, what makes an aphorism different from a platitude? A platitude is something that is easily repeated and falls upon the mind, making no disturbance, and yet is pleasant to believe and remember and repeat. An aphorism, on the other hand, has a certain compelling quality to it, which I say is its beauty. So as truth is beauty and beauty is truth, we see this in what makes an aphorism beautiful. An aphorism is beautiful because as ordered and structured and artful and concise, which is a form of beauty, of course, as the language is, it contains within it a transvaluing of the imagination, a transvaluing. It contains within it a disruption of what might otherwise have been a conventional form of thought in the mind of the one who appreciates it that way. Only in the mind of the individual who appreciates it that way. And that's another thing about art, which is, you could contrast that to the compelling structures of social thought offerings. Art is that which is appreciated by individuals in their own subjectivity. Its beneficial effect is in the consciousness of individuals, in their own subjectivity. But it, of course, is not confined in its action or its benefit in one's own subjectivity. Because one's own subjectivity, when it is awakened by the true discernment of the beauty and truth in art, begins to see its likenesses with objective forms and begins to perceive the interplay between itself and these other objective forms, to the degree that the wholeness of the perception begins to manifest itself fertily in all these other areas that it understands, and it sees likenesses of itself, it sees analogies of itself, it sees progressions of its own intent. And from that, it can build a world, and that can be an inspired world, as we know, or it can be a false world, as we also know, or hope to know, or come to know, knowing which will set us free of it, you might say. So, William Blake said, "We are led to believe a lie when we see not through, but with the eye." So, the senses are apertures. The senses are the apertures of the inner soul. And of course, that statement, conventionally speaking, presupposes a certain kind of, belief or conviction that will make it true for some people more than for other people. And that's okay. Because these kind of utterances are not designed to persuade. Their purpose is not to persuade. Their purpose and their design is not to convince. Their purpose and design is not to provide the grounds for a necessary agreement among a great number of people. No, their purpose is to reveal what is present to thought in the moment of its utterance, which, if it is an inspired utterance, is outside of time. In other words, outside of this world that we see with our eyes, a world that we know is only a portion of what is truly real and truly available to us. But in order to come closer to it, we must fall back upon the powers of art as a gift that is offered to human perception, so that human perception, appreciating the beauty of the forms of art, can learn how to judge the truth of things. So beauty is offered to the perception, truth is offered to the judgment, you could say, in this thing which we can now call, at last, inspiration. So inspiration. So originally, the subject starts out as the gift of truth. And so now, let's just pretend for a moment in this momentary synthesis that inspiration is a further stepping forth of the role that is played by truth. Inspiration is the way that truth becomes a gift. Inspiration is a way that truth becomes a gift to consciousness. It becomes a gift to consciousness by taking upon a beautiful form. The beautiful form doesn't even necessarily have to be seen as such by the eye. It can be sensed or intuited, this beautiful form. But it is the vehicle by which truth is imparted to the mind. Okay. It is seen, though, not by, and this is a temptation, it is a pitfall. Perhaps it has always been this way with human consciousness. As human consciousness evolves, it is a pitfall that we are led to believe when seeing, not through but with the eye, we are led to believe that understanding is a gathering of accrued generalizations that we accrue from learning how we can describe things to ourselves using certain styles of description. But that's not the kind of truth that I'm talking about. The truth that I'm talking about is seen by the whole person, through the apertures of the senses, through the body, through the time and space nowness that sees, and that is what vision is, even as what it sees is universal. It can be expressed as an abstraction, it can be expressed as a generalization, and these things are good. We feed upon them, certainly, and yet we also have to let them feed upon our imagination. The artist's work is to partially provide imagination as a source upon which abstraction can feed, rather than the other way around. It seems, sadly, that abstractions and generalizations become the primary currency, and the imagination, the divine imagination, the poetic imagination, it seems it's picked up for a moment of time, seen and appreciated only in the most sentimental light, and then left by the wayside as one goes on to more serious things. And it has always been the romantic rebellion to call Western culture back to reassess what it has so blithely left behind as being, a mere plaything, the imagination, right? So it could be said, present it in this way, poetically. The answer to this quandary might come from William Blake again, who's speaking to a common fly, a common house fly. Little fly, thy summer's play, my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am I not a fly like thee? Or art thou not a man like me? For I laugh and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. If thought is life and strength and breath, and the want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly, if I live or if I die. So what William Blake is giving us is an image of everything I've just been talking about. Oh, but how much more it brings in and summarizes. What does it do? It gives us, inspires us with, gives us a sense of life, a sense of creative life where truth is a vision that is just there in the form of the utterance, there in the form of the poem. And at the same time, we can draw from it as much as we wish, as much subjective idealizations, and I'm not using that word negatively. It's so much food for thought, to put it more primordially, as it offers to us, as we can sincerely demand from it, it will give. It is rich in that way. In that way, it is a gift, right? It is the gift of truth. So this illustrates the way an artwork can be a gift of truth, the gift of truth. A gift of truth to the mind, a gift of truth to the synthesizing, artistic and questing mind. This gift of truth, given to the mind, how is it that the mind recognizes it? How is it that the mind is familiar with it? Because it is of the mind itself. The mind recognizes its kinship with it. The mind recognizes a correspondence of its nature with what appeals to it in this artwork. This is beauty. This is the action of beauty. Beauty is the appeal made by the artwork to the receptive mind, so that truth is offered as part of what makes it beautiful. as an element, as the element, you could say, if you want to, that makes it beautiful. But it is realized in the individual. It is realized in the individual, and the individual believes, but the individual believes from within themselves. The individual believes from within themselves. And it is not in this way. It can be contrasted with a collective belief. It can be contrasted in this way with a collective belief. And it is important to make that distinction. It is as if the gods of art and beauty and truth are telling us right now that as citizens of a democracy, we need to come into a more fruitful recollection of our own artistic capacities so that we can inoculate ourselves with disillusionment so as to be protected from the mental contagions of untruth that are out there and in here and tricky. And we can look at them and think, oh, of course, yeah. But they're illustrative, like everything. Their teaching goes on and deeper within the psyche. And it becomes more and more revelatory, and yet more and more mysterious, at least in, a partial mind, such as mine. But we know that it is a dynamic. We've talked about that. We know that every thought, true or false, carries a certain charge. A magnetic charge, you might even say. And I'm not talking about magnetism necessarily as something that is, the positive pole or the negative pole. I'm not sure why, but I want to say that magnetism in its essence is the potential of containing both of these seeming polar opposites of attraction and repulsion, or desire and aversion, or beauty and ugliness, if you can even call them that. But this kind of like magnetic quality, or this magnetic charge that the intuition registers. And if the intuition is educated by the arts of democratic citizenship or poetic inspiration, the intuition can unite with the intellect in order to come to a greater awareness of the value of things, the inner value of things, in terms of their truth or their falsehood, their beauty or their ugliness, or their good or their evil, or their health-giving capacity or their health-denying capacity, or their raising or their lowering potential. So there's that ratio. Well, all right then. So William Blake then, again and again, presents us with we find in the literature that inspires us, we find the ideal that our imagination seeks. I say this to you, O sensitive reader, reading whatever that you read, knowing that everything that I am saying is only a momentary synthesis of a lot of different streams and currents and analogies of thought, having truth for me saying them, attending to my thoughts at this very, very moment, and offering and hoping that there will be something in it which will inspire your own faculties, knowing that it might be very, very different in some other form. I don't ask anything other than to allow my thought its next place to go, which is to the voice of the bard. I think we talked about this before. I want to look at it one more time. The voice of the bard. Because all of these ideas, consider them even now. If there are any such thoughts that are the gift of truth, are they not? I've only understood them in this way. They're part of a stream of consciousness. Ha, ha, ha. A stream of consciousness. A lovely 3-beat phrase. 3-beat phrases seem to have currency these days. But stream of consciousness. At one time, it was a critic's idea to denote a certain style of prose writing. At least that's how I came to know it as an established idea. But stream of consciousness could also mean the way it moves, the momentum of one thought moving into another thought, blending into another thought, leading, feeling, lending credence to the next thought that comes along in the stream of consciousness, which is the mind. Because what other form can consciousness take than a stream when it wants to understand the nature of change? And what is offered to consciousness but change? Particles and waves, each thing interacting and changing all the time. And so what is it that can correspond to that in its structure, but the flowing structure of the stream of consciousness? So consider all these ideas as being on this stream of consciousness, arising momentarily. And yet within that stream of consciousness, within that utterance, there are other sensory faculties at play. Of course, we've mentioned in one way or another sight, not just external sight, but internal sight. The seeing which provides the substantial form from which the utterance arises. The source of the utterance is what the senses experience. In one sense, that's one source. And let us remember that the word source etymologically also means uprising, rising through form. I would suggest, in my own mind at least, that source as something that uprises, that is original, rises through forms already and comes to us as source because we know, though we haven't seen it, we know that it has come through many transvaluations of understanding, and it just comes forth, and that is its freshness. Because in its transvaluations, it is offering us, in its transvaluations, it is revelatory, is what it is. So, think of then the utterance as being the vehicle of the body producing further manifestations of itself in the world of sound and time. Or consider it simply, to be simple about it all and much less convoluted, the voice of the bard. Consider it the voice of the bard, and then it turns into moral advice. Hear the voice of the bard. This is William Blake speaking to us. He can do that, you know. Hear the voice of the bard, who past, present, and future sees, whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees, calling the lapsed soul, and weeping in the evening dew, that might control the starry pole, and fallen light renew. O earth, return, arise from out the dewy grass. Night is worn, and the morn arises from the slumberous mass. Turn away no more. Why wilt thou turn away? The starry floor, the watery shore, is given thee till the break of day. You know, there's so much that is happening in there. What I want to say, though, just in the immediate sense, is the form of an utterance taking form in your ear, O heroic listener, in your imaginative eye, O heroic reader. It is taking form in the way that such forms are given to you. Are given to you. Are given to you till the break of day. Oh, does that mean that we see through a glass darkly and then we come to see face to face? When the light of the earth rises from the slumberous mass as it turns toward the light of the imagination, so that the forms that were once only suggested in the darkness to sight become more manifest and revealed in the light of the rising of the imaginative sun. Right? This is the archaic and mysterious phenomena that William Blake's poem, Hear the Voice of the Bard, is being, is invoking, is exemplifying. If it was talking about it, it would just be generalizations. Generalizations, you might say. Oh, but yes, fine. So let me put it this way. There is the wave and the particle. The wave is the subjective quest of the seeking individual, seeking beauty and seeking truth and seeking knowledge and seeking freedom. You could say the particles are the sense datum, the experiential phenomena, discrete, set apart from each other, fragments, suggestive fragments of the whole. But how these discrete particles become whole is when they are united in the subjective experience of the individual. Okay? What that is the description of an idealistic worldview. And that's fine and good. But there's a further nuance of that could be made here. And that is, this idealistic worldview is only thought of in that way when it's thought of as, the subjective mind thinking. But when one begins to understand that the actual vision which does reveal the truth is that which comes through the senses, seeing a world of time and space, and speaking completely and totally in terms of the world of time and space, then we've crossed the line, so to speak, in genre at least, of idealistic philosophy into poetic vision. And it's useful to learn how to traverse that frontier a little bit, or at least to understand that as one looks upon one's map of one's own mind, you might say. Okay, but now, what is it that's really going on here? Okay, it's this. The cognitive arts. That's what I'm talking about, really. The cognitive art of poetry. Forgive whatever partiality that may be obvious here. That's okay. I'm only an individual. But, the poetic vision is of a cognitive nature. It is a cognitive art. In other words, the poetic vision that sees is not itself seen by this eye of time and space. The words upon the page are just signs and symbols, marks upon a page. But they exist as a poem in another place. And that place is in the imagination or in the cognition. In other words, the meaning of these things, the interpretive validity and the interpretive way, the truth, and the life is cognitive. It is seen within the judgment of the seer, the exemplary seer, which is the individual, which is me, which is you. Right? So poetry reflects this in its own unique way, because it is a cognitive. It is a cognitive art. So, all right then. So we have to ask ourselves then, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. You shall know the truth. You shall know the truth. Okay, cognition, cognitive art. Cognitive means knowing. It means knowledge. These things are the same. It's just a different kind of verbal manifestation. But at root, it's the same thing. Knowing, knowledge, cognition. And what is it that makes something something? What is it that makes our understanding true? What is the truth of our perception? Okay. Well, once upon a time, let me just say for fun, could be true. Before Hannibal of Carthage in the Punic Wars, before Hannibal made history by doing the impossible, they said it couldn't be done, by taking a herd of elephants over the Alps. And taking a herd of elephants over the Alps and having them survive. On the other side of the Alps, on the side of the city he meant to attack, and they were war elephants, and they lived, so he could still use them to attack and increase the people's awe. Well, Hannibal made history with that as a great military commander. But I think it happened a lot before. I think that part of understanding the nature of elephants is to understand the ways they can traverse huge, huge distances. Part of understanding the ways of elephants is, it's an art. I believe the word is mahout. It's an old art form, an elephant trainer. These elephant trainers, they could take elephants all across the known world to them at that time, which was thousands and thousands and thousands of miles. And they didn't always just use them for war. No, some of these rulers along the Silk Road, they used elephants, as mystifying devices. There was a kingdom beyond Gore, in what is now Afghanistan. There was a ruler who had an elephant, and he wanted to, give him credit. He wanted to manifest something to the people in the farthest reaches of his domain. He wanted to show them something that they had never been shown before, so that they would know that he was the ruler, so that he would increase the validity of the realm, to mystify the majesty of his realm in the minds of the people in his distant and far-flung outposts of the empire which he conquered or had inherited or had found or what have you. And he found that the elephant was a way to do that. The elephant was like an ambassador, but so much more. An ambassador, but so much more, because it brought to these villagers the splendor, the majesty, the strangeness, and the weirdness of the court of the king who was the ruler of the land that they now lived in. As if they didn't know it, they would know when they saw the elephant. But sometimes people couldn't see the elephant. There was a village where everyone was blind. They couldn't see with their eyes. They could see in other ways. But the elephant, on its diplomatic foray, came to this place, this village of the blind. And they wanted the people there to know the elephant. And so they said, well, we'll have to send those of our number who do see in their way, and they will come back to the rest of us villagers, and they will tell us of the true nature and the understanding of the elephant. And so 6 of the blind, emissaries, diplomats, courtiers, those skilled in statescraft, they were meeting a visitor, an emissary from a distant land. It was the emperor. The emperor? What's that? Who's that? He's the one who sends us the elephant. The elephant? Yes. We're going to go take a look at it. We'll come back and tell you about it. So 6 of the blind ambassadors went to the elephant. They reached out to see the elephant in the way that they see the elephant. One touched the elephant's trunk. One touched the elephant's ear. One touched the elephant's side. One touched the elephant's leg. One touched the elephant's tail. One touched the elephant's tusk. Did I mention the trunk? One touched the elephant's trunk, if it hadn't already. And then they gathered together afterwards, and they discussed what they saw. And, the other villagers came. They wanted to hear it too. And the first of the ambassadors to speak was the one who had touched the trunk. And that one said, the elephant is like an awful and wide pipe, seemingly hollow, mighty and huge, leathery, somewhat flexible, but very, very heavy, reaching up beyond belief, reaching down to the ground. The elephant is like this. The one who touched the elephant's ear said, "Oh no, my friend, you are very wrong. The elephant is not like that at all. The elephant is like a sail flapping in the wind, or a blanket, or a gigantic fan waving in the air." And the one who touched and felt the elephant's side said, "Oh no, you two. You are ever so wrong. The elephant is not like some hollow tube. The elephant is not like some sail or blanket or flapping thing. No, the elephant is a wall. The elephant is a wall, solid and fixed." And the one who had touched the elephant's tail said, "Oh, you are all quite wrong. The elephant is not a wall. The elephant is not a sail. The elephant is not a tube. The elephant is a rope. It is a rope with unbraided at one end, a rope that hangs down and dangles and behaves very much like a rope does. Yes, the elephant is like a rope." And the one who had felt the elephant's leg said, "Oh, you're all quite wrong. It is not rope. It is not wall. It is not fan. It is not tube. It is a pillar. It is a mighty pillar, very sustaining and solid and strong." And of course, the one who had felt the elephant's tusk said, "Oh no, you are all quite wrong. The elephant is not a tube. The elephant is not a sail. The elephant is not a wall. The elephant is not a rope. The elephant is not a pillar. The elephant is a spear, pointed and strong and sharp and large. This is what the elephant is. You are all so very, very wrong. No, it is you who are wrong. No, it is you who are wrong." And they began to argue, these ambassadors who did not see with their eyes. Well, here's where we have the prince. The prince comes. Now, the story doesn't tell us. Is the prince from the capital? Is the prince from the royal ruling family who now possesses this limitless empire? Or is the prince a local one? Is the prince of that very place? Does the prince see with his eyes? Or does the prince see another way? The story doesn't tell us that. Oh, but the story does tell us that the prince sees. And the prince is able to express to them. And the prince comes to them. And, oh, you could even think that it's possible, if the story needs to be dramatic, that, oh, they might have been on the point of coming to blows. Oh, but the prince came and said, "Oh, now, citizens, there's something here that we need to understand. The elephant is sharp and pointed. The elephant is hollow and flexible. The elephant is wide and flapping. The elephant is solid and strong. The elephant is like a column or a pillar. The elephant is like a rope. The elephant is like all of these things, but none of them are the elephant. The elephant is the elephant. It has this called its tusks, which are like a spear. It has these ears, which swing forth and catch sound waves. And this is how the elephant hears. The elephant is large and strong and solid, and you who felt the elephant's side felt this quality of the elephant. The elephant is held and suspended in its mighty form by its legs. Its legs are like columns, and you who felt the elephant's legs felt this quality of the elephant. The elephant has a tail, like many other elephants, and you who felt the elephant's tail felt its rope-like quality. The elephant has the tusk. The elephant has the trunk, and its trunk, this unique feature through which it breathes, through which it grasps. You who felt the elephant's trunk felt this quality of the elephant. The elephant is very, very strange and very, very unlike anything we've ever seen before. But in order to understand what the elephant is, you have to take what your senses have brought you and then put them together in your mind according to the vision of the elephant which I am expressing to you now. And then in your own synthesizing imagination. It is in this way that you will come to an understanding of the elephant's true nature, by putting the qualities of the elephant as brought to you in the vehicles of your sense perceptions, and then combining them through some form which is more than just a combining form. It's a synthesizing and vivifying form, and it is imaginative vision, because it is that which sees the true nature of things, the true nature of this thing which is only presented to the physical eye. Or if one was in darkness, would only be presented to what other senses that are available to one in darkness. So in this way, identifying the nature of the elephant, like poetry, is a cognitive art. It is a cognitive art because it is offered to the knowledge, this inner faculty. And the elephant is still going to be the elephant. It will be the truth. But in order to know that it is the elephant, you have to come to understand that it is the elephant. And in this sense, then, freedom is in knowing that the elephant is the elephant, and having an image or a picture or a likeness or a semblance or an analogy of what that creature created, that creature, what that creature is. So you see, imaginative vision is, when you describe it as idealist or idealism, that's only one part of it, because imaginative vision, as revelatory and suggestive and artsy it seems to be in some of the ways that we talk about it, it is also that thing through which, not by which, but through which we come to understand the world in its true nature, truth, then, through this faculty of vision. You could say poetic vision. This is how we learn about truth and how to discern truth from studying the works of literary art. So once again, so glad, and it is so apt to be in a bookstore where I'm able to say this kind of thing, because there's this sense that all these artistic and functional particles and forms are united by the analogy of their common purpose, their common richness, their common use, and the way that they are made available to the citizens to peruse in order to nourish their own poetic imaginations. Surrounded by such things, it is good to, provide explanations such as these. And hopefully they excuse whatever folly or mistakes there are in the dynamic of my own perception. For perceptions are dynamic, yes, and it was primordial forms of literature, not just the epic novel or even the poem or the epic poem or the prophetic work or the unspeakable chicken scratch of the individual, scribble scrabble. It's not just that that convey this. It's something else, but that too, like a snake, has disappeared down its hole. But I want to find it again, if it's there. Because this is also what happens. There is that in vision which it gives to the mind. But when the mind demands, it seems to stop up the flow, right? When the mind demands this, it seems to stop up the flow. I mean, consider the lilies of the field. And you will learn something about beauty. You will learn something about effortlessness. You will learn something about the way the wind moves. You will learn something about the way life is sustained in a way that you might not be able to see with your eyes. But you cannot go and demand it from the lily. It would be like going to a lily and saying, "Lily, bring me an acorn." Well, you have to go to an oak tree to get an acorn. You can't go to the lily and say, "Oh, lily, tell me, what was that person talking about when he spoke of you so poetically? Oh, lily, can you tell me that now?" Well, sometimes if you ask nicely, and then maybe if you're patient and you wait, sometimes, who's to say? It has happened. It does to all of us in some level, in some way, where we do get what we want. what we deeply want, but it has its own ratio, it has its own timetable and everything. But what I mean to say is we cannot demand the inner meaning of these forms from the forms themselves. It is that which in us which is uneducated which demands that. Instead, it has to be a gift given to us by the forms. And it is art which, art is that which takes into account that part of the movement of creative inspiration, which is of a gift nature. And as a gift nature, a gift is a form. A gift is an artistic form. At this moment in time, and it could be true in a wider sense, at this moment in time, the gift is the exemplary art form. Because the gift is truth in its givenness. It is truth in its value. We affirm its value in ourselves when we recognize the beauty of the gift, and therefore the worth and the value of the gift that we are given. But its form has implications that go beyond that even. And its form has implications in that gifts are the energy of the gift. The gift energy is meant to come to fulfillment in a certain kind of movement, in a certain kind of movement through the culture. Inspiration works this way. The gods work this way. God works this way through gifts to consciousness. Revelatory gifts that are provided to consciousness so that consciousness can educate itself to its true nature. But yet they are gifts. And as gifts, in a certain sense, it is a strict and rigorous form. And it moves through society in cultures and consciousnesses and individuals and natural forms and imaginative forms and visions. It moves through them in certain, inexorable ways. And the trajectory is exact and determined by the nature of the thing. And it's very, very rigorous, and it's mysterious in one sense and totally a revelation in the other, i.e. right before you. It's something that is not like suggested, or it's just right there. Now, how you understand it, then maybe you proceed along a road of suggestion, so to speak. So, but nevertheless, all this is happening, and yet back to that original impetus, crazy thought. What is crazy thought? Crazy thought's always there. Crazy thought in all of us. Everything is available to us. Every moment in the field of imagination, in the field of the mind, there is the utmost of every extreme, and of course there is the blessed middle way, that the sages tell us of in oh so many ways. But, it is all there from the wild to the domestic, But it has a momentum. And the crazy thoughts are just as magnetic in a certain sense. I don't call it beauty, but I call it some kind of attraction. And it attracts because it can appeal to the sense of beauty. And in a certain lower level, you could say, I guess, it is beautiful or artful or very skilled in the ways it seeks to continue its existence. The craziness. The craziness seeks to continue existence. The craziness needs thoughts to be in, needs thoughts to contain it, needs thoughts to nourish it. The craziness is like this. So it is skilled at inhabiting all these different forms of thought. The craziness is, and the craziness is skilled in dispersing its attractive particles to other formal containers in the mind, which can suddenly become energized by the intentions or the thoughts or the proclivities or the obsessions of the mind. The craziness can take that form. And this has always been the way it is. Human consciousness is like this. It is traced in primordial works of literature. It is traced by oh so many things. Magical spells, invocations, nursery rhymes, right? Consider, the monkey and the weasel and, the cobbler's bench. I guess the cobbler, the shoemaker, he had gone to sleep, I suppose. And I don't know, maybe the organ grinder was there, but nevertheless, the monkey got into the house. And the monkey was looking to do monkey type things. And the monkey was in the house. And in ancient Rome, as I understand it, weasels were popular house pets. Weasels even were more popular than dogs or cats. This could be true. In the dimension of this nursery rhyme, it clearly is true. The weasel was there too, and the monkey was chasing the weasel. But you know what? It could be another way. It could be that the weasel was a wild animal, and the weasel found ways to get into the house, just like the rats do, because rats and mice, they're wild creatures, even though they live in domestic spaces, or you see them in domestic spaces, but they have their own ways of getting in there and getting out of there. A whole different domain of aesthetics and urgency belongs to the wild animal than to the domestic animal. Now, of course, that could also be true of the monkey. The monkey could have been a wild creature that jumped in through an open window and knew that this could be a place it could go in the nighttime and find something to eat or something. So I don't even know then. Was the monkey domestic or wild? Was the weasel domestic or wild? We don't know, but they were animals. And they were doing what animals do. They were moving quickly. And all around the cobbler's bench, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought it was all in fun. And then pop goes the weasel. Well, what really happened? I mean, the monkey was being the monkey, looking for, carrying on in its relentlessly restless way. The weasel is a sleek and cunning carnivore. And maybe the weasel just got away from the monkey, but when it realized the monkey wasn't going to stop, the weasel decided to give the monkey a taste of its claws. Is that what was happening when the weasel popped? I don't know. That's just one way to interpret that nursery rhyme. But what it really indicates to us is just the way that certain mental energies in certain settings and places, it gives us a way that we can kind of interpret for ourselves the way that certain mental energies, we can come to understand their movement, and their dynamic in us. But now we've mentioned, Hannah Arendt, the origins of totalitarianism, the banality of evil. We've mentioned those kind of literary works. And so we need to ask ourselves, because this is what also happens, I think, in fabulists such as Aesop, and maybe Mother Goose too, whoever she was. Sometimes I would submit to you that the old fabulists, as visionary and mystical as they were also canny realists, or they could live and move and work in the forms of canny realism and naturalism, and yet in their poetic vision they understood and expressed the actual principles involved. So Aesop, for example, related, according to Aristotle, that old school teacher, according to Aristotle in the Rhetoric, Aristotle said that Aesop attended a court case, a trial in ancient Rome, I suppose, and it was the trial of a demagogue. And the demagogue was one model of the corrupt politician. But in this case, in this trial, the demagogue was on trial for some kind of crime of exploitation of the public trust in some kind of way. Well, who knows what it might have been. The specifics are unknown and perhaps not important. But supposedly Aesop attended this trial. I'm sure that Aesop was a student of human nature. And I'm sure at some points in his, poetic education, he attended these institutions, of social gatherings, such as courtrooms and trials and things, as well as I'm sure of a lot of other things, because he was a keen observer of human nature in society. But anyway, he was at the trial of a demagogue, and he was prompted, was he asked maybe, or did he reflect upon it in his own mind, after he was reflecting on his experiences and wrote it down in the form of this fable. But nevertheless, Aesop gives us the fable after witnessing the trial of a demagogue. He gives us the fable of a fox. Now, to study Aesop means to know Aesop, his his pieces, his tropes, there is that in them which is very, very predictable. When we have the lion, we know a certain quality is going to come into play. When we have the fox, we know a certain quality is going to come into play. When we have the person, a certain quality is going to come into play. When we have the snake, when we have the dog, when we have the ox, when we have the wolf, it goes on, and it even includes inanimate things, of course, like the thimble or the wagon wheel. And it also includes vegetative forms like the tree and the bramble. It includes the river and the sun, and it also includes the gods. Aesop speaks of gods in more than one way, actually. But anyway, Aesop relates the fable of the fox who tried to cross the river at the usual place where it knew it could get across, at the ford. Oh, but I guess there was a rainstorm upstream. Or maybe it was springtime and the water was flowing higher. At any rate, the fox, in crossing the river, got more than it bargained for. It lost its way, it lost its traction, its footing in the river, and was swept in a way it could not control. And the fox was swept across the river. He made it to dry land, but the fox, it must have been some kind of flood. It was like the rushing water careened the fox into a crevice on the other side of the river, on the bank, into a space between the rocks. And the fox was driven into this crevice and was stuck. And then the floodwaters abated, and the river went back to its normal course. Oh, but the poor fox stayed stuck in between the stones on the other side of the river, and the fox could not move. Now nature is a plethora of forms, and some of the forms in nature have competing interests. And the parasitic forms came to the fox and found fertile food. The mosquito landed upon the fox and fed. The tick came to the fox and fastened itself. The lice came to the fox and fed. The fleas came to the fox and fed. All kinds of such creatures made their home upon this poor fox, and there was nothing the fox could do. It couldn't run away, it couldn't jump into the water, it couldn't scratch, it couldn't roll in the dust, it couldn't do anything like that. It was just stuck there, and pretty soon it was just covered by all these ticks and gnats and horseflies, and it couldn't move, and it was covered with them, so much so. Along came a hedgehog, and the hedgehog saw the condition of the fox. Fox, is that you under there? Yes, said the fox. Said the hedgehog, oh, fox, what I see is a megapolis of ticks in the shape of a fox covering you. Oh, fox, those ticks have feasted so much their bodies are stuffed and swollen with your blood. Oh, poor fox. Tell you what I could do, if you want. Ask me and I'll do it. I'll shoo them off. I'll shoo away the fleas and the ticks and the lice and the horseflies. I'll shoo them off of you. And the fox said, no, don't do it. Oh, clever fox, said the hedgehog. You don't want me to shoo all these fleas and ticks away? No, said the fox. Because here's why, said the fox. If you shoo them away, they'll go, but other ones will come. And the ones that will come will be hungry. At least the ones that are on me, they're already full. And so they suck no sustenance from me after they are full. Whereas if you drive them away, other ones, hungry ones, will come, and then it will all start again. So don't drive them away. Just leave me be, said the fox to the hedgehog. As you wish, clever fox, said the hedgehog, and the hedgehog went on its way. So Aristotle seems to indicate to us that Aesop is talking about a lot of things here, cognitive things, but he's also talking about the nature of the demagogue. Aesop and Aristotle and any political realist will say that the demagogue is always amongst us, and the demagogue is working to aggrandize his or her own self, and it feeds upon the system, i.e. the fox, for example, in this analogy. And as long as it gets what it wants, in getting what it wants is how it does the harm that it does. And once it has what it wants, it cannot want anymore because it is sated. And so structurally, it can do no more than that, unless, of course, things change and other ones that seek such sustenance come, and then they fasten on in their own deleterious way. And so it seems that that's the way it is with demagogues in that sense. Well, okay, what that makes me think of then, this exploitative quality in things, this exploitative quality, this willfulness in individuals who seek their own advancement or their own aggrandizement or the mechanism of greed in the moral sphere of the human psyche. And this is will, and this is intent, or as William Blake says, a truth that's told with bad intent beats all the lying you can invent. A truth that's told with bad intent beats all the lies you can invent. This is the saying of William Blake. And this seems to indicate to us that in truth, there's this other element to it, this deeper element, this plumb line, you could say, into its inner nature, which is intent. And so the truth that's told with bad intent beats all the lies you can invent. So it must be the intent that is like the primary factor by which we can identify, the quality and discern the qualities of what's really going on, in any situation that we come across. The intent. So I don't know. I would say then that the politician, the politician as an archetype, seeks its own place, its own power, its own position, its own aggrandizement. And of course, this is a morally neutral thing. I mean, right? Ambition or will, it is morally neutral. I mean, it can satisfy itself, and other faculties within the human can also be nourished so that the strength of the will can be tempered by and educated by and led by like a higher calling, of course. But at the same time, the will is such that the more it feeds on, the stronger it gets. And sometimes there is that in human nature when it turns away from certain forms of moral awareness that it can feed on what it destroys, gain power from what it destroys, and then go on to this other thing. It's like a crazy thought, a crazy manifestation. It's a thing without an interior metaphysical validity, right? As we mentioned at the beginning, without an interior moral metaphysic. And that is, greed and, untrammeled willfulness. And this is motive or motive force of the archetypal politician, if the archetypal politician goes bad, you might say. And any kind of democratic structure has to be able to understand that it can be this way. And so then the structure has to have some kind of form or way it can acknowledge this and perhaps even contain it or counter it or become aware of it among, the inspired populace, for example, or maybe, in some other way. But there is that which needs to be tempered in the public sphere, that in the human being of will and ambition and voraciousness for power, ambition, aggrandizement, riches, or what have you, that can have this destructive effect upon the host that it feeds on or gains its power off of. And so it seems like that, in a certain sense, Aristotle is acknowledging this. But what makes it possible, for that to become so destructive, so much so that it subjects the culture to such a harmful effect? And what is the response of the citizen in a democracy, who sees that? What is the response of the citizen? Well, in a poetic sense, as Walt Whitman might have, instructed us to understand, it is the vote. Remember, vote comes from volition, comes from will, exercised in a different kind of sense. It's will in a discrete unit, the vote of the individual citizen, exercised in relation to the formless ambition of this or that power-seeking politician. And the vote of the citizen is to be kind of like a counterforce to that, to like this aggrandizement, you might say. And so the vote poetically, carries a sustenance and a moral meaning that nothing else does in any kind of visionary conception of any kind of democratic social form. And I'm not sure, but what I would think it needs to be understood in this way more, because it is a counterbalance to a certain kind of overweening self-importance. If it's exercised, and understood in this qualitative kind of way, and its meaning can be understood and its value can be understood in this way, so that the consciousness of an individual democratic citizen can be a cradle of this kind of poetic understanding of what it means, to vote, and what it is to see this kind of play of power seeking that we have always seen as people who live among other people. Mm-hmm. So, but what in this case is the fox? In the case of an overweening and ambitious demagogue or politician, what is the blood of the fox? The blood of the fox is the belief of the populace, the belief of the supporters that it finds among the people who provide the parasitical entity, the corrupt politician, with this energy. This energy of allegiance or identification or whatever, what have you. That is what the parasitical entity, feeds upon in order to increase its strength at the expense of the health of that upon which it feeds. And yet, so then, well, what is the mechanism of this? How is this possible then in the body politic? I mean, we know that the mosquito's piercing nose or whatever it is, it's not a trunk like an elephant, or the, the flea or the tick or whatever, we know how that works. We have scientific or biological descriptions of that. But how does the demagogue or the corrupt politician feed upon the energy of the people? Through the mechanism of belief, through the mechanism of the vehicle of mass belief, which is elicited from the people through disordered thought forms, uninspired, morally speaking, uninspired stories propagated in terms that the populace can understand and identify with, and have moving and magnetized parts that change into other parts and situations, each with compelling drama to lead the populace on this journey or this pathway into a world of understanding created for the ends of a certain group of greedy benefactors, i.e. corrupt politicians or, whatever have you. It's this mechanism of belief. And so, what is it? Step back for a moment, and it's just people trying to live. Some people try to live through corrupt means. Other people learn to live through, more morally vivifying means. And, it's just that every creature, every being seeks its own life. Every thought seeks its own fulfillment. Sane thoughts do every bit as much as crazy thoughts do. And yet, I wonder if this is like political science here. I used to wonder and ask myself, political science. They speak of it as political science. Well, it can be that. I can see how it understands that. But what I really want to understand political science as a science is, I want to know, what's the theory? I mean, what's the overarching picture of whole understanding? And I mean, I want an understanding of a pattern which will account for what I know and which will also leave room for me to assimilate what I do not know. And if I come to know it, I want this pattern to be able to accommodate the knowledge that one has as one comes to know more and more, and as things fall away, through a glass darkly, like through the eye, not with the eye, through the eye, we see these patterns. And if they are inspired patterns of recollection and understanding, then we can learn to track and trace, some of these inklings so as to help ourselves to discern all the things that we need to discern metaphysically and morally and poetically. And so that's what one seeks in a theory. That's what one seeks in a science. The word science means knowledge, by the way. Knowledge can mean so many things. I mean, just now we've looked at one manifestation, one kind of transitional manifestation of what the understanding of knowledge could be in the utterance of this particular individual at this particular time. But anyway, so these thoughts, be they gifts or not, or whatever, they move. They move and have their being and have their effect on other thoughts, and they form these kind of patterns. And some of these patterns we can identify with without really understanding them. And to understand that momentum, that's how you understand how to, bring an entire population your way in order to aggrandize yourself in some kind of way. And of course, what's really effective in that is knowing skillfully how to use untruth. Or put it more specifically, how to see and exploit the way belief fastens on to certain kinds of dynamic momentums, more so in some situations than in other situations, and then to provide more of what the fish are biting on, you might say. So, and in the absence of overarching theories, I mean, sometimes I think one of the quandaries is, we yearn for a whole pattern so that, we can fit in the things that we do understand and have room for the things that we don't understand so that we can begin to come to see them, have a safe place so we won't be hurt by these things that we vaguely see in the dark. And then as the sun rises and the light increases, then we begin to discern the lineaments and the borders of it to understand, what it really, really is. But we suffer often enough because this is all taking place in a field of thought, which is full of all these changing things. And yet, even those thoughts have certain observable patterns. Maybe not an overarching theory, but there are these, just like water flows in the stream of consciousness. I learned this first. I don't remember what river I first saw. The Trinity, some fork of the Trinity. The Brazos, maybe the Brazos. Certainly in the Missouri, in the Big Muddy. I mean, the beautiful flowing of the water. Standing there to see the water flow. And standing to see so many different dynamics and momentums of flowing, to see them even turn on each other and become whirlpools and rivulets that swirl in some sense and then flow on and just seem to dissolve into the larger current, happening all the time, unrepeatable when looked at, in just like discrete and particular kind of viewpoints, but yet making sense in a certain way. The wider one assimilates the analogy of the flowing of the river water. The particles and molecules of the water are one thing, but the flowing of the pattern of the water is something else. And we see how they whirl, and the energy of the flowing turns on itself and offers us a totally different shape to look at and to understand. A totally different shape, and yet a real, almost abstract manifestation of the energy that is bringing it into being. I mean, water is like the ultimate abstract sculpture. you could say. But, oh, and also I just want to say here, the word, I think there's a Japanese word for song, which is simultaneously the same word for the whirling in a grain of wood. The knot in the grain of wood. And that's the word for song. So you could say that the whirlpool in the river is a certain kind of song where the flowing energy stops, turns, and recollects itself and views itself, and then is gathered into the momentum of itself in a certain really specific way, and then goes on into the larger stream from there. It's just like watching a river is like, a living lesson in metaphysics. The river is a church, you could say. And so you can see patterns in this way. And so swirls, whirlpools, conspiracy theories. Okay? It's not too far a jump. Give me, the gift of your generosity, cognitively speaking. And what are conspiracy theories? Momentary explanations. Momentary explanations that satisfy a deeper need, an actual and valid need, but just like junk food can keep you from starving, that's why it's so important, as we are counseled in the scriptures, to hunger and thirst. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Hunger and thirst after righteousness. This seems to indicate the necessity of sincerity to oneself. A desire for gain in this kind of setting, a desire for worldly gain would be taking on oneself into the acquisitive realm and then leaving behind, the instructive economics of the gift flow, the gift domain of the aesthetic imagination. If one were to try to aggrandize oneself, in other words, to personally exploit or gain from a particular insight into a pattern, one could end up, going down, like the wrong path, so to speak. Nevertheless, also all these little theories, all of them, you can, it's not the issue of whether or not they're true. Of course, that is always an issue. But the meaning of them, I think, is, what is the meaning of conspiracy theories? Maybe that's the question. What is the meaning of what seems to be? Okay? What is the meaning of something that is not true and yet seems to be true and gathers belief in this really compelling way so that it seems to have this magnetic hold with a real energy. I mean, it's a real energy that attracts people to untruth. It's a real energy because there is that in us that hungers for the recognition of what the pattern is. And if a source that we trust, a stream of consciousness that we are familiar with, that's never hurt us before, never bitten us, if it provides us along its conveyances elements of things that we can weave into an ongoing narrative which will give us not only a view of the world, but a view of our place in the world and a view of our place in the world of like morality and power and stuff, then we are, hauled into it, so to speak. It's a dynamic. It's inscrutable. It's a phenomena. I believe what we're talking about. In a democracy, but and that's just momentarily socially relevant. Poetically, we have to look at this kind of the way that patterns come into and out of being, and they appeal to different parts of us. These flowing patterns. So they are fed by this ongoing narrative with real specific kind of players and motives. And so, I think about Pop Goes the Weasel. And I think about, it's almost like the blind leading the blind or the blind chasing the blind, but it's not quite that. It's exemplary energies behaving in the way that exemplary energies behave, sometimes in concert with each other and sometimes in conflict with each other. All around the cobbler's bench, the monkey chases the weasel. The monkey thought it was all in fun, and then pop goes the weasel. The monkey thought it was all in fun. I hadn't remembered that so much the last time I was thinking about this. The monkey thought it was all in fun. Then pop goes the weasel. In other words, like any dynamic of mental energy, things can turn. Things can turn and it's inevitable, and you know it as inevitable, but only in hindsight. When it happens, it just happens. And one doesn't expect it because one is following one's own proclivities, enlightened or not. The monkey thought it was all in fun. Chase the weasel, And then the weasel somehow shows it's got claws or something like that. So in other words, I don't know, I'm just suggesting like a certain kind of political theory where there's this dynamic of inspiration, which I've kind of suggestively alluded to, of the gift given to the mind, the gift moving in the ways that a gift does move in the mind, which are expressed in the forms of art and the way of life of the artist. There's that. And then there's this other dynamic, this dynamic of folly. And it's these transformations occur that are almost like chemical reactions. And when they happen, it's like, I didn't know it could become this. So it's like, to the tune of Pop Goes the Weasel, you could say, I listen to conspiracy news, just like I play with matches. I never stop to question myself. Poof! I'm a fascist. Right? I listen to conspiracy news, just like I play with matches. I never stop to question myself. Poof! I'm a fascist. This is how it is. Playing with matches. Matches are attractive. Matches combust, and you never know when they will. They're great. They're really fun. I mean, when you're a kid, look at it that way. It's the same thing. We yearn for the volatile areas of life. We yearn to come into contact with them because it makes us feel that we are taking part in the evolution of our larger world. But it is offered to us, this notion of the larger world is offered to us in this exteriorization of consciousness, which is, the mass media, the social media, or the television, or the computer, or what have you. And it offers to us these visions. I shouldn't say visions. They're like mechanized visions. It's the modern day equivalent of the satanic mills that William Blake looked at. It is the manufacture of meaning into dramatic attraction. I don't know. And so you're drawn into it and you participate in the pattern of it. And then it has these effects, which still are somehow exemplary and show us something of the nature of the mind. Okay, so that's just a little bit of that, the gift of truth, whatever that could be. So I better bring this to a peroration now. And it's the time of year when this is a good little thing to tell you. Speaking of the cobbler, this is a different cobbler. The cobbler and his wife, the shoemaker. He didn't have any monkeys or weasels in his workshop. He didn't have very much at all, as a matter of fact. This poor cobbler, he was so very poor. He was a shoemaker. And all he had left was enough materials, leather, string, tacks, wood, to make a pair of shoes, and that was it. And then he would have nothing after that to build with, nor to sell. And so he took the leather that he had, and he shaped out the outline or the pattern of a pair of shoes, and he put them on his bench. And he said, I'm going to bed now, and I'll come back in the morning, and, then I will continue to make these shoes out of the last material that I have, and then I will do what I can with that and hope that there will be more in this scarcity. And then he went to bed. And while he was asleep, 2 naked little elves came out of a hole in the wall. They went over to those outlined patterns of the soles of shoes, the leather, the strings, the nails, the blocks of wood, the thread, the needle, and very quickly, elegantly and skillfully and joyfully and with great delight, perhaps mischievous delight, they made a pair of shoes out of that pattern. And then they scampered off, as elves do, especially naked ones. And then in the morning, when the cobbler woke up, he came into his workshop. My shoes! They were not made last night. Did I come here in a dream or something? This is very strange, but oh my, these are well-made shoes. uncanny. And then there was a knock on the door, and he got up and he went over to see, and it was a rich man. Have you a pair of shoes, O cobbler? As a matter of fact, yes. These? Oh, said the rich man, this is a fine pair of shoes. Such workmanship I have never seen before. Oh, I will pay you well for this. And so the rich man paid the cobbler a good price, so that the cobbler had money to buy more material to make 2 pairs of shoes. And so that night he was much happier. And he cut out the pattern for 2 pairs of shoes, just the pattern, the outline and the leather. And then he went to bed. I'll come back in the morning and I will continue this and make things out of the material that my good fortune has brought me. Anyway, but he went to bed. Well, the 2 naked little elves came out during the night, and they made, when morning had come, there were now 2 pairs of shoes, and they were just perfectly made. The workmanship was exquisite. And another rich person came and bought those shoes and paid generously, so that the cobbler had more money to buy more material to make more shoes. And so it went on like this. He would leave the pattern of the shoes in ever greater pairs, ever greater quantities of pairs out. And in the morning he would come out and the shoes would be made and he would sell them. And so the shoemaker was prospering now. And one day his wife said, you know, something mysterious here is going on. And we are benefiting by it. And the shoemaker said, I know. I've tried to attend to it in my mind. I try to give thanks somehow to something invisible, but I continue to benefit by it, and it's the work that I do, even though it's taking place in a kind of a different way. And his wife said, let us stay up tonight, and let us see what is happening. Because between the time we go to sleep and the time we wake up, it's when it seems to happen. That's when the pieces of shoes become shoes. And so the cobbler said, okay, let's do. And so they hid behind the curtains that night. And they stayed in their hiding place, and they watched it happen with their corporal eye. They saw the naked elves come out, and they saw the elves make the shoes, and they saw the elves disappear just as the sun was rising. And they came out of their hiding place, and they looked at each other, the shoemaker and his wife, and they said, ooh, we have seen with our own eyes a great mystery. Oh yes, they are helping us, these elves. And his wife said, you notice something about those elves? What? They don't have any clothes. Oh, I guess maybe the shoemaker thought about that for the first time. Oh, my dear, you're right. Look, they're making us things that we need. Let's make them something that they need. I think I can do it. Maybe she saw the pattern in her mind. I'm going to make a little pair of trousers and another little pair of trousers and a jacket and a vest and a shirt and some pants. I'm going to make some hats. 2 hats for these 2 naked elves, bareheaded. I'm going to make clothes for the elves. And the shoemaker said, the miracle that I have seen in my craft of shoemaking. These elves, they have inspired me. I will do as you do, O wife. I will make a pair of shoes for them, each of them. They'll have their own pair of shoes. I'll make them just the size of their feet. Now, I was watching them as they were working, and I have in my imagination the shape and the size of their feet. I know that I will be able to make a perfect pair of shoes for them, for both of them. And so, all that day, the shoemaker's wife made the clothes, the pants, the shirts, the vests, the hats, even the socks. And the shoemaker made 2 exquisite pairs of shoes, just the right size. And then that night, instead of laying out the unmade shoes and their raw materials, they laid out these clothes and these shoes. And then, I guess it's okay to do this, they wanted to see. So, once more, they hid behind the curtains to watch. And so, they were hiding behind the curtains and they were watching. And in the dead of night, the elves came out of their hole in the wall and they went over to those clothes and those shoes and they began to scamper and dance with joy. Aha, aha, we have our clothes now. We have our clothes. The clothes that we will wear. Naked, we no more will go. We have what we have. We have our clothes. We have our shoes. We'll come back here no more. Bye-bye. And then the elves, fully clothed and well shod, danced away through their hole in the wall, and they never came back to that place, at least not in that form. Whereas the shoemaker and his wife, they came out of their place where they were watching, and they reflected on what they had seen. And they realized, to the eye, it's amazing. Oh, what an amazing story. Elves, magical things transformed. And yet, it's perfectly natural. You have the materials for shoes, and by golly, you make shoes. You know how to make clothes, and you make clothes. You know when there is a need for something, and you provide that need. You know when you have very little of something, and you get more of it, and then you can benefit by that in your chosen way as you do the work in this world to provide that which is needed and that which is good. So that is what these elves have shown us. And so they reflected on this, and for the rest of their lives they prospered. And even though they didn't see the elves again, they somehow knew that the lesson and the vision that the elves had provided for them would remain, and it would still be good every time they would revisit it in their imagination. So, it's a parable of the gifted soul. And the gifted soul is what we become when we stretch our minds to take into account all of these things that exist in this other realm of value than the arenas of power and scarcity and all of this. And so that's just a little bit about that. So that's why we would call it the gift of the truth. The gift of the truth. So what is the truth? It is that which is provided by the poetic imagination. And what is the poetic imagination? It is that in us which is like unto the Spirit of God. And why should I put it that way? Why should I use a religious term? Well, it's not a religious term. Because, religion and art, really, the truths of art and the truths of religion, the visionary inner truths, when they're understood by the individual soul, they're not different from each other. It's only that the artistic creation is a synthesis of all the different strands of thought in that moment. And it has validity in that moment, even at the same time as it seems to suspend the judgment of, certain kinds of questions of temporal duration or something like that. Whereas the religious truths, well, look at it this way. You can look at a religious painting, an icon, or a poem or anything really. And if the artist is great and the vision is great, what you see is that which religion gives, but it's given in a more primordial form. I mean, it doesn't have any reference to some kind of third social energy, which would be like the institutional, magnitude or something like that. It's more like it's seen from within. It's like the alone to the alone. And that is the connection that we have with, the deeper things of the spirit, you might say. Oh, but, these thoughts can continue to run on as they run on. And hopefully they will build up that which should be built up and transvalue that which should be transvalued. But now I see that the time has come for me to thank you for your heroic listening and your heroic imagination and the inspired interpretations that are available to us all when we share this material, this imaginative material from the well of the human imagination here in a bookstore in San Francisco, in America, in the world, in the universe, and within as well. Anyway, I thank you for your heroic listening, and let me just say, we need to close with something from William Blake. I think we'll have to close with what is in my mind right now, and it's an admonition, it's a teaching, and it comes from William Blake, and I think I said it at the close of the talk the other time too, but William Blake said, I give you the end of a golden string. Only wind it into a ball, and it will lead you to heaven's, to Jerusalem's gate, built into Jerusalem's wall. So it's like following a string that connects you with other things. It's like that trajectory, that analog, which takes you where it needs to take you. Anyway, this is my message. So I thank you for your heroic listening, and God bless us one and all, and vision. Stay visionary, O visionaries.